When was the last time that you genuinely surprised yourself with how poorly you handled something? Got anything coming to your mind? Some of you are smiling. I don't want to talk about that, Daryl. If you got a most embarrassing story, a most embarrassing moment story, it kind of reminds me of the pandemic. I don't know if you can remember back that or if you've scrubbed it from your brain. Do you remember the early days of Zoom meetings at work? There was always that guy who forgot he had his camera on. So he's scratching or picking or doing something embarrassing and things like that. And so you're kind of, casually chatting, texting something in the chat to get him to wake up. Good times. Those are good times. You guys are probably not interested in sharing yours. I'll start. A few years ago, I made the mistake of wearing white shorts to the church picnic. The error of that choice became obvious when the water balloons started to fly. Yeah, no, listen, it could have been worse. I had on my favorite Star Wars boxer, so it could have been worse. If you got something like that in your life, I'm talking about a Will Smith, Chris Rock kind of moment, right? Just handled maybe poorly. Yeah, I know, not that you want to share with me. A number of years ago, I got an email from somebody who accused me of handling something poorly. And I mean, I mess up all the time. Like, get in line. I have a million of those things, and normally it wouldn't bother me. But in this email, they accused me of getting the gospel wrong. That's kind of weird, right? Yeah, they actually accused me in this email of preaching another gospel. No, listen, in preacher world, that's a throwdown, okay? It's to accuse a pastor, any pastor, of getting the gospel wrong is like accusing Michael Jordan of getting a dunk wrong, or Sidney Crosby of getting, goal scoring wrong, or like Gordon Ramsay being told he runs a kind kitchen, or Paul Hollywood told his cake has a soggy bottom. Am I talking to anybody here? Yeah, you get the point. Now, I know I haven't been around that long, but you guys know me enough to know that I've done a lot of stupid things in my life. But if there is one thing that I want to get right, this might be it. Yeah, this might be it. If you have a Bible with you or your phone, go ahead and open up the Bible. We're going to the book of Galatians today in the New Testament. If you go to the Bible app, you'll find my notes there. Galatians. In the first century, the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to a church in Galatia, modern-day Turkey. This is believed to be the earliest or the first of Paul's letters that we have, written sometime between AD 50 and AD 52. This is an early letter. And if you're new to church, maybe you don't know the Apostle Paul, he's the GOAT, okay? Greatest of all time, the Michael Jordan of apostle stuff, whatever that means. This is who's writing. In Galatians chapter 1, Paul throws down in this letter. It's like Gandalf when he confronts Sauron. You guys know what I'm talking about? Tell me, friend, when did Sauron the Wise abandon reason for madness? Then the wizard battle. Am I a nerd or are you guys with me? You're with me. Oh, good. You're with me. In this letter, Paul, it starts off innocent. He greets his friends with grace and peace. And before you know it, he throws down. Verse 6, Galatians chapter 1, he says, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion, are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. Listen, you can embarrass me all you want. Tell me my fly is down, I got ketchup on my face. Catch me on a Sunday where on my slide I've got there instead of there or there. Whatever, that doesn't embarrass me. But, this is a big deal. You tell me that I'm getting the gospel wrong, and you and I are going to have words. Here's the truth, though. Christians get the gospel wrong all the time. Yeah, absolutely. We get it wrong all the time. There may have even been times in my own life where I've got it wrong. Now, what do I mean when I say that? What am I talking about? Christians getting the gospel wrong. First thing that came to my mind, fundamentalists. Have you ever met a fundie? Yeah, fundamentalists. Grace is the name of their church. That's just about it, though. That's pretty much all the grace that you can find. What about, maybe you've heard of the prosperity gospel crowd? I'm not sure they're getting the gospel right. What about Christian nationalism? Yeah, I'm going there. Yeah, that means that God's grace is with us. It's not with them. Yeah, God's grace is with our country, but not their country, our party, our culture, our gender. Listen, if you think that God likes green more than blue or blue more than red, I think you're getting the gospel wrong. What about this one? You treat the gospel like a formula or a magic spell. You know what I mean? Abracadabra, open sesame. If you think that if you can get people to say the formula right, something magic happens, you might be getting the gospel wrong. What's the point? I think there's 100 ways that you can get the gospel wrong, but I think there's also some pretty amazing ways that you can get the gospel right. And we're going to talk about that today. Now, I know I introduced the email. I don't remember what really all that much at all about this erratum or this, what delinquencies or derelictions I was being accused of in this letter. I just remember thinking kind of ironically, I'm not sure this dear woman is maybe getting it right. Like, I'm not sure she really understands Galatians, where she borrowed the burn from another gospel. It's always good when people quote scriptures at you in their emails. That's good times for pastors. I think she also maybe is misunderstanding Paul's whole point with the letter, the gospel that Paul's defending amidst all the other versions that are out there. And so I thought, let's spend some time reading that today. I'm going to read it for you in verse 6. Again, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. If I haven't greeted you yet, let me stop there. If you don't know me, my name is Daryl Buckle. I'm one of the pastors here at Pathway. So good having you with us. So good having a bunch of guests here to celebrate with Ben and some new people I haven't met out there. For the next couple weeks, we're just going to spend a couple weeks because that's what we have. We're going to talk about what it looks like to live in the grace of Christ. Because when we get this right, the message is really good news. You're no longer defined by your worst or most embarrassing moments. You're no longer disqualified by your weaknesses. You're not a prisoner to your bad habits. You're not a slave to your worst fears. Like when we get this right, we experience the gospel or the good news of Jesus coming. Jesus coming becomes good news in our lives. All of the sudden, and that's kind of cool. When we get it wrong, we become scorekeepers and gatekeepers and performers, sometimes outright frauds. The church becomes a courtroom, feels more like a club than a community. There's a dress code, sometimes secret handshakes. Like, it gets really weird. Actually, if we do it wrong, the church is the last place a broken person would come instead of the first place a broken person wants to come. And sadly, churches, and listen, a lot of people in them get grace wrong sometimes. It's okay to admit that. It's a little embarrassing, but it's okay to admit that sometimes we all get grace wrong. So if you're taking notes, maybe write this down. The gospel just means good news, and it's the good news about Jesus. And the good news about Jesus, if you weren't aware, is grace. Yeah, it's grace. So what are we talking about when we say grace? One of our favorite text to quotes from Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 says, "For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. This is not of yourselves, it's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." So grace is the foundational architecture of the Christian life. That's in my notes if you like to fill in the blanks. Grace is the foundational architecture of the Christian life. It's the foundation upon which everything else is built. If you grew up with the version of faith that didn't have much of that whose architecture looked like it was getting built differently, then you can maybe take note. Now, in John's gospel, when he is telling his version of the gospel, the story of Jesus, this is how he writes it in verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father. Here it is, full of grace and truth. Now, around here at Pathway, we often say, if you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. Yeah, if you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. So John's kind of saying that. He's saying Jesus is the Word made flesh, or God in human form. And then he says, if you want to know what God is like, and watch what he does here, it's kind of cool. He picks the same two words that God used to describe himself in one of the most famous or significant encounters that God has ever had with a human being in all of the history of time. Of course, I'm talking about when on Mount Sinai, God gave the 10 Commandments to Charlton Heston. I mean, Moses, right? You guys are familiar with that story? That's in Exodus 34. It says, then the Lord came down. Imagine that. God, from wherever he is, coming down to where Moses was, in the cloud, and stood there with Moses and proclaimed his name, his own name, the Lord. As he passed in front of Moses, imagine yourself there. God speaks. It says, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, or loving kindness and truth. Now, in Hebrew, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The words are hesed and emet. But in the Greek version of the Old Testament, when the Old Testament was first translated into Greek, they used the same two words that John used. John quoted these two words. It's like John saying, remember when Moses himself was standing in the full radiance of the presence of God? I don't know if you remember that story at all. Moses came down from the mountain. People were all afraid of him because his face was glowing with the radiance of the glory of God, if you can imagine that. So John in his gospel is saying, listen, we've seen the unmistakable glory of God in the face of Jesus. And you're like, really? How did you know? And some of you are thinking, well, maybe it's the radiance. Yeah, maybe. Actually, I think it's this. The grace was unmistakable. Yeah, friends, grace is what God looks like. That's what John's saying. Grace is what God looks like. That's the truth. John 1 doesn't just mean that God came in the flesh in the person of Jesus. Sure, it means that, but not just that. He's saying, I'm telling you, we've seen his glory. Jesus, full of grace and truth. Jesus, like the glory of God, grace and truth. For John, and I think this is a theological text, John. This chapter is a theological text. He's trying to make a point. For John, grace is how you recognize that God came in the person of Jesus. That was the fragrance of God on this person, Jesus. And the sad thing is, I know that's not how some of you, not the version of God that you got when you were growing up in some churches. I know that. I've heard enough stories from you guys to know that's not how some of us were exposed, or not the picture of God that we were first told as we were growing up. I know, in fact, that that's not what some of you continue to hear when you're scrolling around YouTube or watching, pastors or televangelists on TV spreading fear and spewing hate. I know that's not the only version of God that gets told, but listen, grace is what God looks like. Grace is how about this? Grace is how God loves to reveal himself in Exodus, in John, in Jesus, to all of us. Okay, my word nerds out there, any word nerds? Stay with me, here we go. In classical Greek, charis is the word. It comes from the verb kairo, which means to rejoice, to be well, to be calmly happy. And you're like, yeah, that's a vibe. That's what it is. That's how it started. Grace is a vibe, you get it? Initially, grace meant that which affords joy or pleasure or delight. Yeah, those things are grace, joy, pleasure, delight. That's good. Some of you are thinking, Daryl, like a warm cup of coffee? Yeah, right? Like, that's great. How about like a sunset? Yeah, that's right. And remember, to the Greeks, grace had an aesthetic root. What does that mean? Well, the Greeks celebrated beauty. Anything that was physically or morally beautiful, they described as possessing charis, as grace. That's the word that they chose to describe things of beauty. So as the term evolved, it kind of transitioned from that abstract quality of beauty, just a vibe, to a concrete action. It began to signify favors or beautiful acts, beautiful deeds. Like, hey, I love your shirt. Thanks. Can I buy you a sandwich? Do you get it? It's not just a vibe, a compliment, a good feeling. It's actually more things. Gracious words, acts of goodwill that demonstrated kindnesses or favor towards another person. Grace has substance now. And then, of course, grace shifted to the realm of social ethics, because now it's about specific deeds. It actually became the standard term for a benefit received or a deed performed freely. The other week, Shane dug through his email history, and then he showed up to staff meeting with blizzards. Come on! Like, he actually got all of our orders right, because at some point in the past, he had to ask us what we wanted. Shane is so good at this kind of stuff. Like, gracious dude. So, and of course, we as a staff team all responded with grace, right? I'm talking about gratitude, because of course, that's how grace evolved to include gratitude. Have you ever said grace before a meal? It's what the word we use. It's when we give thanks, express gratitude. And if you're watching now, some of you are kind of recognizing that even before grace was used in the Bible, it's sort of this built-in cycle, isn't it? Of joy and beauty and blessing and benefit and then response. All of that is grace. Coffee and sunsets leads to gratitude and thanksgiving to God for all of his loving kindness and fear. Some of you get to spend time with family, and it's been a long time since you see them, and you drive home and you're like, that was such a good time. You just feel like that was a moment of grace, of God's goodness in your life. This is how grace becomes part of our lives, how we start to understand grace. All of that is the Greek background for this idea. So in biblical Greek, where we find it, grace translated as charis occurs somewhere between 140 and 157 times in the New Testament. That's a lot of times. It is, however, in different forms. Over 100 of them are used by Paul. Remember, the GOAT. He is the preeminent theologian of grace. That just means Paul has more to say about grace than almost anyone else. Have you ever met someone who's just like, it's like if you cut them, they bleed grace? You're like, Darryl, why would you cut somebody? That's a weird way of saying it. Yes, it is. But there's people who are just so gracious. Paul, it seems, at least wanted to be one of those people. Let me give you some examples. In Ephesians 4:32, Paul says, be kind and compassionate to one another. And you're like, oh yeah, that's Paul. Forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. Some of you are thinking, Darryl, what are we missing? Yeah, you are missing something. The Greek verb translated forgiving or forgave in verse 32 is charizomai, which is the verb form of our noun charis. He's talking about grace. But you guys know that, don't you? Of course you do. You know that forgiveness is a kindness that you show to someone or someone shows to you, whether you deserve it or not, whether they deserve it or not. It's free, no strings attached. You guys understand that's a grace. Forgiveness is a grace. In biblical Greek, forgiveness is a form of grace. Just like in your life, forgiveness is a form of grace. It's one of the best forms of grace. Philippians 1:29, Paul says, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him. Darryl, you're doing it again, aren't you? Yes, I am. The word translated granted is also the word charizomai, which is why grace sometimes can be hard to understand. unless God gives you the grace to recognize that even suffering, when it's part of the purposes of God, is a gift, isn't it? Yeah, suffering too can be a form of grace, though you only discover that sometimes after you've been through it. This is a great mystery, I admit. Now, I could spend years and years of Sundays telling you about grace. When God wanted to show you what grace is like, he sent Jesus. Over 100 times in the New Testament, Paul talks about grace. When he's greeting his friends, he says, "Grace be upon you." To encourage the weak, he talks about grace. Sometimes to confront, he talks about grace. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. So we're still not there. What exactly is grace? One of my favorite pastors, theologians, Frederick Buechner, said, "After centuries of handling and mishandling most religious words, it becomes so shop-worn that nobody's much interested anymore. Not so with grace. For some reason, mysteriously, even derivatives like gracious and graceful still have some bloom left. Grace is something you can never get, but can only be given. There's no way to earn it or deserve it or bring it about any more than you can deserve the taste of raspberries and cream. A good sleep is grace. So are good dreams. Most tears are grace. The smell of rain is grace. Somebody loving you is grace. Loving somebody is grace. He says a crucial eccentricity of the Christian faith is the assertion that people are saved by grace. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. So the grace of God, he says, means something like, here is your life. You might never have been, but you are, because the party wouldn't have been complete without you. But here's the world. It's beautiful, and terrible things will happen. But don't be afraid. I'm with you. Yeah, Frederick Buechner, like that guy's such a legend. I love that. A crucial eccentricity of the Christian faith, that people are saved by grace. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. Another popular author, Pastor Philip Yancey, said, grace does not depend on what we have done for us, but rather what God has done for us. Ask people what they must do to get to heaven, and most people reply, well, you got to be good. Jesus' stories contradict that answer. All we must do is cry, help. As Paul said it, by grace you've been saved through faith. And this is not of yourself. It's not of yourselves. It's the gift of God. It's not by works, so that no one can boast. And it sounds so simple. But we still get grace wrong sometimes. Have you ever met someone who loves to tell you all the ways that they're right and you're wrong? Some people. Yeah, some people. Extra grace required people. Maybe somebody who thinks they're a better Christian than you. I'm not sure they're understanding grace. Yeah, that's what we call a saving faith, is a gift of grace. It's not by works. It's not because you're particularly smart or good or worthy or deserving of reward. It's not earned. That kind of faith, not earned. It can't be attained. It's a gift. I know that makes some of you uncomfortable. It's a gift. All you have to do is turn in the direction of Jesus, choose to receive the gift, and then walk in the Jesus way. If you meet somebody who thinks they've received the gift better than you, I don't know, just nod your head, maybe give them a thumbs up and tell them, good job, you did it. Good job. Yeah, you have too many of those types in the same church, though, and you might have a problem. And in the Galatian church, there was a whole bunch of people who believed that you were saved by grace through faith, but you stayed or were maybe kept, right, by observing the law of Moses. This is why Paul, he's using throw down language. Not only are you deserting, but you're perverting. And Paul's like, He's being a little hyperbolic maybe. Is that what you're like thinking? No, he's just angry. Listen, big words. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to some other gospel. There were people in the Galatian church who thought to be saved you needed Jesus and just a little surgery. Right? Then a lifetime of obedience to just a few hundred laws. Yeah, in Galatians 2, remember Paul's got his knickers in a knot. Galatians 2:15 says, we who are Jews by birth, not sinful Gentiles. I think he's being snarky there. Verse 16 says, know that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. So we too have put our faith in Christ Jesus, that we may be justified by faith in Christ, not by the works of the law, because by the works of the law, no one will be justified. Can he make it any more clear than that? Paul thinks he can. So he continues, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Verse 21, so I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. What's he saying? He's saying adding law keeping to grace as a path to righteousness is not just unhelpful, it's an abrogation to the cross. Pardon my French. Special occasion language. It just means that you can't carry both. You can't have it both. You can't carry the cross and carry the law, because one will save your life. Peter calls the other one a yoke that you have to drag around. That's what it's about. When you get grace right, you protect the message of Jesus, the gospel, from being diluted by all these additional, unnecessary expectations or programs or cultural Christianity stuff that functions essentially as works-based righteousness under a different name. You get this wrong and you start building a church culture where belonging, I know you've been to a church like this, belonging depends on behavior or compliance, right? All these unspoken rules or expectations. Don't wear your hat on the platform. What? Sorry. All sorts of things that just feel more cultural, but they're treated as gospel things. All these unspoken things. Christ's death is honored in words, but then functionally set aside because they're trying to hold both the cross and the law and come up with something they think is better than grace. And here's the point. I don't know if this was the first thought you came, the reason why you came. I don't know if you wake up every day with this. We all need grace. Some days more than others. But we all need grace. Why? Romans 3 tells us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Maybe you've heard that verse before. It continues, but we're all justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. That's good news. Grace is the only way to get there. The only way to be made right with God is grace. When we get this right, you stop ranking people by their moral performance. Because you treat the ground at the foot of the cross as level. Like we all need it the same as everyone else. You get it wrong, and you might use grace as spiritual-sounding theological language, but you still believe there's hierarchies. Daryl, we're all saved by grace, but we know some of us are just a little more saved than others. There's hierarchies, right? We think that there's people who do and people who, if we're honest, we're not sure if they deserve forgiveness, right? When we get it wrong, what are you saying, Buckle? If it's all about grace, does that mean I can? No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. Romans 6 says, shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? By no means. We are those who have died to sin. Romans 6:15. What then? Shall we sin because we're no longer under the law, Daryl, but under grace? By no means. Grace is not permission to sin. It's a power greater than the law could ever be to help you not to. Yeah, think about that for a little bit. Receiving real grace, that's what actually changes you. It's grace that actually changes you. Titus 2 puts it this way: for the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, and it continues, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in the present. It's grace that does that. Don't miss that. It's grace that does that. Grace is a better teacher than the law and legalism could ever be. It's better than guilt. It's better than fear. It's better than, sorry parents, consequences. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be consequences for our kids. We're big fans, so is you. I'm just saying grace is better, because the same grace, Titus says, that saves us is the grace that forms us. Grace is the best thing you could possibly do for your kids. And it's a direct challenge to any faith system that motivates obedience through shame or performance pressure. In fact, parents, the word translated training in Titus is actually the word used for how a parent forms a child. Grace is patient. Grace is persistent. Grace is relational. It's all of those things. Titus 2 tells us that grace trains us towards three things, if you noticed: renouncing those things that are harmful to us. I guess my son needs more grace. Living with self-control, orienting our lives towards God. If you're a parent, isn't that what you want for your kids? I just want them ultimately to orient their lives towards God, to figure out how to learn to live with some self-control, to stop doing the things that are harmful to them, and make better choices, right? Parents, if you're struggling with this, you're like, well, Buckle, it just feels so urgent. It feels so important. I don't want to get this wrong. I get it, but you need to know that all three of these are in the present tense in Titus. They're all in the present tense. You can trust that making room for grace in your family, with your friends, with your kids, making room for grace will work in the present as well. And it's not turning a blind eye to bad behavior. It's not. It's just refusing to define your kids or the people around you by their behavior. And when we get this right, you really do start to believe that spiritual formation is grace's work. You're like, if Jesus came full of grace and truth, he says if it's by grace we're saved and grace we're formed, maybe I could trust the way of grace for the things that I feel are so overwhelming and so important with my kids' formation. Maybe I could trust the way of grace. Maybe you could believe that spiritual formation is the work of grace. You train your kids how to make decisions that reflect grace because they were raised within the safe grip of grace. If you're parents, write that down, the safe grip of grace. If you're not, wouldn't you like to have a marriage that you could describe as the safe grip of grace? What about your work environment? What about your extended family situation where people can get catty sometimes? Thanksgiving Sunday or Easter Sunday dinners can be pretty strange and catty, lots of mixed emotions. I know I'm talking to someone out there. I mean, it's not my family, but maybe it's yours. And listen, I've been talking to parents about kids. When you are an adult and you experience the safe grip of grace, it's so liberating, especially if you've been raised with something that doesn't look like grace. You stop gritting your teeth so much and you start paying attention to what grace is at work in your life doing. You find you have the strength to say no to sin, but it comes from love and not fear or legalism or shame or guilt. None of those things enter the picture. And you start realizing that quite by accident, because grace has had some room in your life, all of a sudden the community around you starts to look more and more like grace as well. Some of you are thinking, of course, Daryl, this is my first time here, and it sounds like you guys at Pathway are just soft on crime. We're not trying to be soft on crime. We are trying to be strong on real life change, and we've seen grace work. We've seen it work, not just that which saved a wretch like me, but we've seen all over this community people's lives being changed because they found a community of grace. We've decided to put all of our eggs in the basket of grace. Why? Because grace is better. It's better. That's the way of grace, and this is the why of grace. The reason why we want to spend a couple weeks on grace, somebody asked me, why are you talking about grace? It's not just because it's the foundational architecture of Christian theology, and it kind of is. It's not just the most important message we can give on a baptism Sunday when somebody's taking some of their first steps in following Jesus. It's not just that. It's because every single Sunday at Pathway, people walk through the door who need grace. Not just me, but me. Every single Sunday, people who've hurt some people close to them, right? Who have done things that are maybe hard to forgive, maybe hard to admit. People trapped in cycles that they can't break on their own. Talking about addictions or anger patterns that keep repeating in their life, and they try and find that willpower is not enough. We get some folks who have written themselves off. They actually think that maybe they're disqualified before God even gets a chance to surprise them. Oh, listen, some of them are hard to love. Yeah, they're chronically negative and bitter, the kind of people who push others away. And that pattern often means that they receive less of the very thing they need most. I'm talking about grace. There are people carrying the weight of failure, and they've never had the courage to tell people the thing that they carry, the weight that they carry, because the shame has made them pretenders. And when people get close, they isolate themselves from the very community that could help them. Every single Sunday at Pathway. Not just people like that, but people who come in and believe honestly, no, Buckle, I'm good. Like, I'm not sure I really need grace. Like, I got my report card, I'm basically good at this thing. I'm good at church, I'm good at this thing. Don't smoke, don't chew, don't date people who do. Jesus reserved his sharpest words for them. I don't know what brought you to Pathway today. Just a wonderful coincidence to come and celebrate with Ben. Something told you need to stop by a church and it's been a while. Whatever brought you here today, I just wanted to make sure that we invited you to receive again the amazing grace for whatever you need. Whatever it is that you've carried, whatever the thing is that makes you cynical walking through the doors of a church because you've had some bad experiences. You missed out on experiencing the grace that Jesus' life was full of. Whatever. Because here, Pathway, this is the reason we show up. We show up for all of these types of people. All of them. And we are all invited to live in the grace of Christ. Remember, it's not something you have to earn. It's not even something you have to live up to. There's nothing you have to do to maintain grace. There's nothing you have to do to fix yourself before you can start or take steps in the way of faith. Remember what you do. You turn in the direction of Jesus. You accept it. You receive it. And what Paul said, you just try to learn how to live in grace. To live in grace every day. Like Buckner said, remember, there's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. Just go and live in grace.